Good afternoon. My name is Rob Connor. I'm a faculty librarian at the Triton College Library. And the subject of today's presentation is information literacy. The why behind the how. I'll explain the reason for that subtitle in just a second. But very importantly, I wanted to assure you that this is in full cooperation with the Association of Concerned Librarians. The Triton College branch, which is the founding and only chapter of this inspired group of librarians who believe that we should be concerned about something. This morning when I was on the desk, I was approached by one of my colleagues who's here right now, Alex Gutierrez, and he asked me if I was ready for this presentation. And I looked at him and I kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, Alex, it's a PowerPoint. I mean, you put up a slide, people read it, and then you move on to the next slide. It brought up some memories for me. I was present at a very high level briefing in my former life, where the commander-in-chief of U.S. Army forces in Europe, a chap by the name of Crosby Saint, yes, that was his name, and he was being briefed by a colleague of mine, and the colleague had, your standard bullet points up on the screen. We didn't have PowerPoint in those days. We had transparencies that you put on overhead, but it was the same idea. And he was, basically reading the transparencies as he went down. And Crosby Saint, without moving a muscle or looking at the major that was giving the presentation, said in a growly sort of voice, "I can read, Major." And then that poor fella didn't know what to do next, because that was his gig. He was going to, and now he didn't know what to do. I squirmed for him. So anyway, and I was sitting in the audience. So that brought up, what are we trying to do with the PowerPoint? There was a gentleman by the name of Edward Tufte. He is a former professor of political science and computer technology at Yale. And he is one of this guy hates PowerPoint. He hates it to death. He thinks that it is dumbing down everything and it's useless. And he declared that the only slide he ever saw that really explains something to the point where you don't have to speak is this right here. This is a graph of Napoleon's 1812 venture into Russia. And this is the Neman River that crossed over, that put him into the Russian territory. And he crossed over with an estimated 685,000 soldiers. Biggest army ever assembled to that point ever, by a large margin. And this is towards Moscow. And these are the number of troops. He finally recrossed the Neman River. He had 93,000 men. So, according to Brother Tufte, this is what we should strive for in PowerPoints. Bullet points, he thinks, dilute thought. So let's get to my bullet points. Now, the term information literacy was coined by this gentleman, not a librarian, a lawyer. He was also a protege of a Wisconsin. This fellow was from Wisconsin. He's from Milwaukee, and he was a protege of a congressman from his district, obviously, Kastenmeier, who was very interested in the emerging information fields This is back in the 70s. Okay, so he was very, very interested in this sort of thing. And when Zurkowsky joined him in Washington as part of his staff, he convinced Brother Zurkowsky to head up a consortium of information companies, and they formed what is called the Information Industry Association, and he was the president. And in 1974, he delivered a 30-page paper at the National Commission on Libraries in Washington, D.C. And that's when he coined inside that paper the phrase and described in some detail information literacy. This is what kicked it off, but it percolated for a long, long time. Okay, what is information literacy? And I shortened it to IL, not ILL, which is like ill, but IL. And why should we care what it is? Well, we at Triton should care because the board that runs this college, the Board of Trustees, have selected 5 general education student learning outcomes that guide all teaching and all assessment here on the campus. And number 3 is information literacy. So we should all care what it is, and we should all, along with the others, see how we as faculty and staff follow through with this. Then what is information literacy? According to the Association of College and Research Libraries, the ACRL, which is a subsidiary branch of the American Library Association, who has taken over ownership of information literacy in academic libraries, it is this. And I think the operative phrase here is reflective discovery. I really like that term because it urges us to make sure that we instill in our students a sense of reflection on what it is they're doing when they research. Some people call this reflection just simply critical reading. But it is a reflection. Now, it's a big ask to get a first-year college student to reflect on anything, especially if that first-year college student is embroiled in researching for a paper that he or she has had been assigned and has no interest in, perhaps. But it is the point of information literacy to introduce our way of researching to the students as being reflective in nature. It's also understanding how information is produced and valued. And if I read one more, someone in the rear will say, I can read, Major. So we'll just keep on going. Now, the ACRL, in thinking about this, in the early days, in the early 2000s, information literacy was presented as a set of standards. You should be able to do this, that, and the other thing. In 2014, the ACRL massaged this to the point where they came up with a framework consisting of 6 frames. And there they are right here. You can read them because I know you can read. Okay? Just take a look at those things right now because we'll be going through them one by one in just a second. But it's interesting to note what the goal of all of this is. What does the ACRL want out of this? What is the end game? When do we win? That's right. We're taking over. Okay? Now, you have to understand that we in academic librarianship are probably some of the most paranoid people in the world. We see our places in academia slipping away, and every new technology that finds information is as another chip out of the block of our defenses. It's all, of course, hysteria. It's not going to happen. But we're always looking for a way to insert ourselves in the education of our students. And if we ever get the chance, our students are going to get better. But why the library? Why the library resources? Unlike Google and unlike most of the things you'll find online, which is the very first place any student, or any of us perhaps, will go to find information, is the information that comes from library resources is authoritative. Okay, that sounds good. What does it mean? Reliable. How's that for a word? It's reliable. For all intents and purposes, when you have an authoritative source, it has been vetted in some way or form. And the library specializes in collecting these types of resources and cataloging them and making them presenting them in such a way that they are easily recalled. Okay? Subject expertise, societal position, special experience, all of these things go towards authority. So let's take frame one. That's a good segue into frame one. Authority, according to frame one, is constructed and contextual. Well, that's really good. And if I left the room, everybody would be scratching their head. What in the world was he talking about? I'm not leaving the room. I'm staying here. And constructed is the idea borrowed from an educational theory. John Dewey and his ilk. Learners come to the education experience already knowing things, already perhaps having a point of view. And knowledge is constructed in that fashion. Each brings that unique knowledge to each learning encounter. Okay? Contextual, the information need of the subject may help to determine the authority required. What is it you're seeking? What is the question that needs to be answered? What is the need that needs to be fulfilled? And that will shape where you go for answers. So the authority that one may not need, for instance, in writing a lengthy tome on some obscure philosophical point, would not help someone trying to find out who won more gold medals at the last Olympic Games. Okay? Different authorities for different needs. Now, what does this mean to the researcher? What, you know, the person that we're trying to help here, okay, the student in our case. It all means that they have to look wider than they probably want to, because they have to encounter a variety of information, and they have to maintain an open mind. They have to motivate themselves, and I put this in white because authoritative sources, authority might be manifest and assigned to a source in different ways. Okay, as we discussed before, if you're doing a paper that happens to deal with something that is currently going on, you wouldn't look for authoritative books because the books haven't been written yet. You're probably going to have to go to a newspaper, and that's a different sort of authority. Assessing content with a skeptical stance. Once again, reflection. Critical thinking. And be conscious that maintaining these attitudes requires frequent self-evaluation, reflection. Am I being one-sided? Am I letting my own prejudices cloud what I'm doing? Frame two, it's a process. Creating information is a process, okay? Some of these information arguments have been going on for decades, centuries. The information itself will, because if it has any age on it, exist in many different formats. It may be digital, it may be print, it may be film, but all of it is information. Regardless of the format, it's produced to transmit a message. And that's the message we want. And the process of creating information is iterative. It happens little bit by little bit, and it accumulates like barnacles on a ship. You know, it accumulates. And it is being constantly revised, where we have one scholar saying one thing and the scholar disagreeing, and then everybody jumps on it and starts, and that's how it accretes. There are variations in this, lots of them, and we have to acquaint ourselves with many of those variations as we possibly can. And when we attune ourselves to that, we become more and more sophisticated in the searching and information process. What does it encourage researchers to do? Seek out characteristics of information products that indicate the underlying creation process. The reflection upon this will enable our students to become better, more thoughtful researchers. Frame 3, information has value. This is my favorite, number one, because it's so brief. I can recall this one easily. This is where we start talking about citation and footnotes and endnotes and all that stuff that drive most clear-thinking people completely insane. But information has value as a commodity, as a means of education, as a means of influence, as a means of negotiating and understanding the world. Okay? Phenomenology. The founders of the creators of the U.S. Constitution understood this, and that's why copyright is in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. Now, what does this mean to the researcher? Well, the researcher has to be able to approach information and whatever the information creates in the end in a legal and ethical way. And these are outlined here in these points that you see here. In other words, you cite. You give credit where credit is due. Frame 4, research as inquiry. Why? I can't think of this one. Research has value. I can remember this one. But if you look at it, it is just that, isn't it? In plain and simple words, a process that focuses on the problems of questions. Questions about disciplines or between disciplines that have not yet been revealed, perhaps. This process of inquiry extends beyond academic world to the world at large, world of politics, whatever. For the new researcher, the students, our students, what does this mean? You got to think of, we must instill in them the idea that research is an open-ended question. They're not going to perhaps resolve anything except to find more questions. An appreciation that a question may appear to be simple, but if you dig, probably is not. Seeking multiple perspectives is probably the most enlightening part of this. And once again, brings reflection into focus. and seeking appropriate help when needed, which means going to the library and asking one of us. Scholarship as a conversation. This is another very, very homey way of looking at research and scholarship. All it means is this question that you're asking has probably been asked before, or you wouldn't be finding anything in any resource about it. If it's never been asked, no one's written about it, no one's discussed it. But generally speaking, it has been. And it's part of an old, probably conversation in one form or another. And there are different ways of speaking about the problem, different formulations of argument. Any issue will be characterized by several competing perspectives. Not just one or two, but several. Some may be similar to the others, but different enough to show. They also understand that while some topics have established answers, there are still questions to be asked. For the new researcher, what does this imply? To realize that they're jumping into the middle of a conversation, okay? And in order to better appreciate the conversation, they need to do some studying. They need to be looking back and they need to be looking forward. That they should seek out conversations taking place in their research area. We do this when we teach library instruction by insisting with the students that they formulate a very focused thesis statement, just for this reason right here. They don't want to get sidetracked with peripheral things. They only have 5 to 10 pages in order to explain what they were trying to do, prove what they're trying to do, and get out. So they must focus, and the focus comes from their thesis statement. But they must also see themselves as contributors. Even if what they've said has been said before, they are contributing. The sixth and final frame, searching as a strategic exploration. When you're doing research, it is not lineal. You may be bounced from one method of search, computer search for instance, to another method of search, from Google to library cards to anywhere. And in order to track down what it is you're trying to find. Comprising of inquiry, discovery, and serendipity. Serendipity, I love that word because we used to describe that in the old days when people read books. When you were looking for a book and you went into the card catalog and you found it, because of the way we organize in libraries, all the other books on that subject will be to the left and right of that book. And you may serendipitously find something better. Searching identifies both the possible relevant sources as well as the means to access those sources. So research is not only research is training for further research. Okay. It's an education. For the researcher, mental flexibility and creativity, it's so true. Some people are better endowed with that than others, but it's an exercise to expand both. Seeking guidance from experts, once again, just cross the mountains, come see us. We're there all the time. Persistence and patience. two words that probably are not on the top of anybody's hit parade, but should be. And as we used to say in my former line of work, subject to your questions, that concludes my portion of this briefing, General Saint. Any questions?
I would just say, like, really quickly, like, in the almost 50 years since information technology was coined as a term or developed as a term, what would you say is the biggest change to happen to the field of information or the understanding of information technology, and the biggest, like, core that has remained the same?
Well, the ways of storing technology. All right. So the cloud, sticks, whatever, that has changed, making it more convenient for more people to do it. The idea behind it, no, same thing. A knowledge seeker in talking to Xenodotus, who was the first librarian of the Alexandria Library, would be doing the same thing as our students do today, but he'd be doing it in Greek.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Would you say that students have replaced the feeling of serendipity with irony?
They may have. They may have. If you and I ever catch one up and the stack's actually looking for a book, we'll ask him. We'll wrestle him down to the ground and ask him. First, we'll take a picture so we can share it with people. Any other questions? Ben.
How do you think is the best way to help students understand about, well, I'm thinking about, like, in social media, people feel very entitled to use whatever they've already seen. Maybe because they think it's funny, maybe because they feel like it's a great quote and they want to inspire someone else. So it's very easy to come across things on Twitter or Instagram, and someone is out there just putting out information, and there's really nothing to reference back to an original person, but there's always maybe like a hashtag to kind of get more eyes to look at it. So how do we help students understand the differences between when they're using just other people's creative property?
Well, if it is, and anything that's put into a permanent state, any original thought that's put into a permanent state is copyrighted from the time it's made. You don't have to go to a copyright lawyer or anything else. You're covered by the Constitution and Title 17 U.S. Code. But if they feel that that is an authoritative source and they want to quote it, they would just use a citation and they would find that, easily enough. But I think what they would learn from librarians and other academics is that reflective idea that I was talking about before. Not everything you see is knowledge. Zurkowski himself, the fellow that coined the information literacy term, defined information as the building blocks of knowledge. It isn't knowledge until you've reflected upon it and thought about it and read about it. Then it becomes knowledge. And I think that's a fair way of looking at it. Yes, sir.
Do you feel that students are becoming more numb to the amount of information that they're receiving, or do you think they're becoming more sensitive to it?
That's a good question.
All of the technology that they constantly have all
Yeah.
of the time.
Yeah, I think rather than numb or sensitive, I think that perhaps they're fooling themselves into thinking that because you have access, you have knowledge. And that is not the case. Access is not knowledge. And they have to learn how to properly access those knowledge bases, those databases, how to, as we discussed here, how to recognize authority, how to recognize, let's call it reliability then, how to reflect on these things, how to widen their search, understanding the process and all of those things before they can understand and before it becomes knowledge. It's almost an epistemological question. And in order to know something, you have to be justified, you have to believe it, and it has to be true. So justified true belief was the mark for knowledge for years. Now people have been picking that apart for decades, of course, and attacking it. But it's a good base to spring from, I think. If you can say epistemological, which isn't always that easy to do. Any other questions? Hi.
How would you like library instruction classes, like information literacy classes, to be reflected outside of our library instruction classroom? Like in your ideal world, what would that look like on the rest of campus?
Well, I don't know if you could do the how and the why justice in an hour. Remember, one of our biggest challenges as librarians is to be able to do this with go here, click on this, and all the other things that we have to do in an hour, in a 50-minute class. Very, very difficult. I think what we need to do is become so familiar with the concepts of the 6 frames, so as when we tell them, okay, the reason you're here is because we have sources that are authoritative, and you click off the first of the frames in your mind, and you hit them with a little blurb about that, and then as you go on and you contact another frame, you give them a little blurb about that. It takes maybe 15 seconds, 20. I think we'll be able to do justice to both, because we have 2 different, and Alex and I talked about this one time. You have 2 different competing needs here. There is the need of the instructor who wants his or her students to learn how to find information. And there is the more subtle need of our profession to explain information literacy. So you have an explicit need from the instructor and an implicit need from our profession. We have to find a way, and I'm working on it. To blend the 2 in such a way that it's possible to get it done in 50 minutes. That's the challenge.
Maybe what's an example or like a way that students would use this outside of the classroom setting? Like whether it's like researching for a career field or
Absolutely. They would recognize, I hope, even if they're doing a Google search, something that is more authoritative than something that is billybob.com. The United States government, for instance, and we all show them this when we have College 102 classes in and stuff like that. There are government sites that discuss different career paths, what is needed to become part of that career path, what those people are paid, generally speaking, over the country, and what sort of job environment they'll have, and that sort of thing. And there are authoritative sources for that. The U.S. Bureau of Statistics is one of them, and they create this database. So it's as good a data as you're going to get anywhere. But it's looking for recognizing and using those references that separate the researcher to the person who is, what is the word they satisfied? Is that the word? Where you know the first thing comes up on Google you grab because it's the first thing that comes up on Google, and it's sufficient and you're satisfied. You know, so it's satisfied, I think is the word. And very, very often it's not, because it's however Google, and does that. I don't know how that's done. Anything else? Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for your attention. Am I still on camera?